While I was chairing a panel up at Everything Electric, up in beautiful British Columbia, Canada, I got the opportunity to ask a representative of the automakers exactly why North America is heavily promoting, building and selling vehicles that are 8 times more likely to kill a child than when they're hit by a conventional vehicle. SUVs, for example, were involved in 15% of collisions with vulnerable road users and yet managed to kill more than 25% of them. Pickups were involved in just 5.5% of incidents, but killed nearly 13% of pedestrians. And when electrified, even fully electrified, these larger vehicles emit between 1.2 and 3.8 grams of extra carbon dioxide in indirect emissions for every kilometre they travel. And that doesn't even account for all the extra resources used in production. Because I don't know about you, but when I hear stats like pedestrian deaths are up more than 75% from their lowest point, which was in 2009, I think to myself, that sounds bad. But the appointed representative of the automakers explained to the audience that it's simply what the market demands. North Americans only want big trucks, he said, so that answers that. You all don't want small vehicles, so that's the video done.
Kate, is that really true that Americans don't want smaller cars?
Oh, all right, I'll do some actual work. Where was I? Oh, right, yeah, some drivers would really like to just be inside their own personal mech suit and crush anyone who isn't in a car to a messy little pulp, just like they're some kind of manga live action role play thing.
Okay, come on.
Sorry?
Focus.
Sure. So the number one comment type that we get here at the channel is, when will we get smaller cars back in North America? And when automakers are talking about demand, manufacturers would please just like us to ignore the fact that the automakers don't actually sell cars or small vehicles in the US or Canada pretty much at all, and that you can't import them from abroad for reasons that we'll come to. Oh, and don't mention the fact that marketing from automakers keeps pushing the age-old lie that bigger is better for safety. So today I'm going to talk about getting smaller cars back, and super importantly, I'm going to talk about something time critical that we need your help to get done, and how you can push automakers to actually make and sell the vehicles you want. Alright, so first up we're going to do a bit of quick and dirty history, because you know us, we're nothing if not queens of context. But I know some of you are dying to know about the time critical thing, so if that's you and you're like, it's time critical, I must do it now, then hit the contents under the video and skip forward to the We Need You section. So across much of the world, at least 68 countries as of the time of writing, vehicles are built and tested to a standard set by the Inland Transport Committee of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. That working party sets the standards for motor vehicle construction across all of those 68 countries, and the standards originally created in 1958 have been amended numerous times and now consist of 135 regulations. These standards are enforced by a process called type approval, and essentially any country that is a member of the 1958 agreement can test and approve a vehicle as meeting the standards. And once a vehicle has this type approval, then all members agree to allow that vehicle to be imported and sold. There is quite a lot of nuance around that, and lots more complexity. To say I've simplified things doesn't really cover it, and I'm sure someone will explain just the important things that I missed in the comments below. But some countries are considered easier to get type approval in, some countries have extra regulations that make type approval more stringent. Germany is a notable example. But the general principle is vehicles or components from them are tested against a standard, and the result means that manufacturers can sell basically the same vehicle in many markets. So in most markets, when an automaker needs to install a "please do not press this button again" light that illuminates after you press a button, they have to meet just the one standard. There were, of course, two major non-signatories to that standard: Canada and the United States. Because, of course, freedom!
Kate, are you trying to lose us more subscribers? They don't like someone telling them that they're wrong because... tea?
Because these two tiny, feisty upstart nations had to set their own incompatible standards. The wonderful thing about standards is there are so many to choose from. Yeah, the US and Canada both went ahead and gave a giant middle finger to the international community, and each set up their own similar to each other's, but not quite the same set of standards around motor vehicles. These sets of standards also don't match the ones that the majority of the rest of the world settled on, of course. As they say, one of these things is not like the others. Well, two of these things. In the US, the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, or FMVSS for short, very catchy, are regulated by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, often just called NHTSA, which is part of the Department of Transportation. Transport Canada sets the rules for the Canadian equivalent, the CMVSS, which, while it mostly follows the US's FMVSS, interestingly also allows for some, but obviously not all, European standards to be used in place of the FMVSS ones, most notably for lighting and, I believe, front bumpers. Unlike type approval, which requires independent testing, both the CMVSS and the FMVSS are based on self-certification by the manufacturer. Basically, the manufacturer tests to say that their car meets the required standards, and Bob's your aunt, it's approved. That means the manufacturer has to do a bunch of testing, of course, because if they're found to be non-compliant after the fact, then things can go not well. Now, the reason this matters in the North Americans only want huge cars debacle is in part because neither the FMVSS nor the CMVSS have anything about vulnerable road users in their requirements. That's why things like the Cybertruck are quote-unquote fine in the US and Canada, but unlikely to pass crash safety regulations in Europe. It's also why things like the Chevrolet Silverado EV are pretty much only importable to Europe by individuals or in very limited numbers, and it's looking like Europe might not allow imports anymore. Anyway, because the EU is suitably concerned about the risk to pedestrians. But that's not the only reason, and we went into much more detail than I'm going to today on the emissions and safety whys when we talked about the DOE and the EPA and, of course, California's CARB, and indeed the so-called chicken tax. If you want more on that, it is from last year, but we covered it up here. The TLDR is that US regulations have favoured larger, more polluting vehicles with easier to hit targets and lax safety standards, so automakers have continued to push them, all the while pushing the easy to believe lie that bigger vehicles are just safer. In actuality, the safest crash is the one where both vehicles are as light as possible and of a similar size. SUVs and pickups are more prone to rollovers in a crash, and while, yes, the larger vehicle with equivalent safety features will generally fare better if it doesn't roll over, that's a game with no winners, because each year trucks and SUVs have increased in size, and we can't all drive infinitely large vehicles. There's a finite amount of road. They won't all fit. So why are we talking about this right now? Well, my lovelies, the time has come for you, the good people of the internet, to step up and tell the world that you would like some better rules. And stunningly, when I got back from Canada, I sat down to write this script and found out there's actually a proposed rule from NHTSA regarding pedestrian safety. On the day of writing the script, it wasn't even on regulations.gov for public comment, but it is now available and it is open for comment. This moment, while this video is being recorded. And it is about time we got a new rule because, as we've reported before, at 40 miles per hour, 100% of pedestrians struck by an SUV died, versus about 50% for a regular car. This new rule would also be a step towards harmonising US rules with global standards. And FYI, we're going to drop a link in the down below to both the rule and the comment page for the rule, since getting consumer support is going to be vital. Because, and I don't want to make unwarranted assumptions here, but when asked about the new rule by NPR, the automaker group, the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, well, let's say they didn't seem enthusiastic. And I'm going to hazard a guess that, having lied to the public for years to sell less safe vehicles on which they make much larger profits, it's going to be a weeny bit undesirable to them to shift to making actually safer things and make them less profit at the same time, and as well have to persuade the public that, you know, maybe it would be better if they didn't buy a GMC Sierra just to run to the shops. Especially since it kinda exposes the lie they've been telling all along. Just like many automakers aren't really that fond of admitting that they knew back in the 1960s that gasoline cars were going to make life on the planet difficult and unpleasant, and decided that doing nothing was a more profitable option than, you know, not polluting the planet and killing us all. And of course, I know there will be people in the comments screaming that being a member of one of these two countries is all about the freedom to drive whatever you want, however you want, and screw the consequences, for the very same straw person argument that is used to justify the fact that very few US states actually require motorcyclists to wear motorcycle helmets. But just as someone who chooses not to wear a motorcycle helmet ends up forcing the consequences of that decision onto others when things go wrong, usually first responders who clean up the mess, your liberty to drive an insanely large and pedestrian unfriendly vehicle ends when we're sharing the road with other road users, some of whom aren't in multi-ton weapons. Also, and here I'm speaking very specifically to those making that argument, if we can all drive what we want, then why can't I import whatever car I want? Why am I not driving around in a Nissan Sakura? Anyhow, so the proposed new rule would create a new federal motor vehicle safety standard, pedestrian head protection. This would apply to passenger cars, light trucks and pickups, multi-purpose passenger vehicles, which includes SUVs, crossovers and vans, and smaller buses, and would require reduced risks of serious to fatal head injury to children and adult pedestrians in impacts up to 40 kilometers an hour. That's about 25 miles per hour. This, according to NHTSA, covers about 70% of vehicle pedestrian collisions. It's also expected that those changes would also be beneficial at higher speeds. NHTSA also points out that it plans to adopt a pedestrian protection program as part of its new car assessment program, more commonly known as NCAP. And yes, you might respond to this in the same way as our most lovely director of photography, whose unrepeatable response ended with the comment that it should have happened 10 years ago. And that the adoption of this new rule would be the first step of incorporating vulnerable road user protection into the NCAP. However, NCAP is voluntary. Automakers choose whether they wish to make changes that are reflected in the NCAP score. And looking at Euro NCAP, you can see that automakers make differing degrees of effort when it comes to vulnerable road users. NHTSA itself notes that electronic stability systems and rear visibility cameras only ever reached 70% of the marketplace when they were voluntary. This new rule would be mandatory and would lead to dramatic changes to the front-end vehicles to prevent them, you know, killing people unnecessarily. The other thing that this rule is part of is, and yes, I know from the immense sigh I just heard that you're all thrilled that I'm diving again into politics, but it's part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was put in place by the current administration and encourages global harmonization of vehicle regulations. The proposed rule is based on a global technical regulation, GTR 9, And this is a good thing because it moves us closer to a world in which small vehicles produced for other markets could potentially meet the requirements to be imported to the US. Incidentally, for those excitedly typing in the comment box already, one thing you might want to comment on is the fact that NHTSA believes the proposed rule could be stronger if the test area extended to include the grille and not just the hood on all large vehicles where the head of a child or shorter adult pedestrian may be in contact with the grille. Another thing that you might want to comment on is that the flat-fronted or near flat-fronted vehicles that have started to crop up with autonomous vehicle projects also should be included. The Cruise Origin and the Zoox both have potentially risk-increasing designs for pedestrians, and NHTSA itself notes that with careful design of the rules, these vehicles which would currently be excluded from the GTR 9 could be deliberately included in the US testing requirements, which, you know, planning ahead, it's a good thing. Now, while the auto industry may comment that the new rules are impractical, testing by NHTSA indicates that it is possible for North American platforms, mainly SUVs and pickups that don't already meet this rule because they're not sold internationally, to meet the rule. It won't be free, and it will require them to actually consider this stuff during the design phase, which they've studiously been ignoring. But regardless of what the auto industry say, it is possible. Now, some of you who are politically aware may be wondering if we're going to talk about the Chevron decision. We're not. Because yes, that could have huge implications for whether any of these rules actually matter, and depending on what happens later this year and who the occupant of the White House is next year, whether the government can make rules about anything the Supreme Court doesn't agree with may become more of an issue. But we already made a video about that. It's here, so we don't have to talk about it again, not right now. So go watch it. But first, let's get down to brass tacks of what, if you want these rules to happen, you need to do. Okay, so part one, polite, specific, supportive comment in regulations.gov, ideally talking about the things we talked about, as well as general support for the rule. Part two, the political bit. Representatives Scanlon and Raskin introduced H.R. 9408, the Pedestrian Protection Act. This bill would place limits on vehicle design, for example, hood height and bumper structure, with the express intent of protecting vulnerable road users. Once you're done writing something to regulations.gov, then emailing or, better still, calling your representatives and letting them know that you're on board with this bill, or better still, would like this bill and then something stronger, that's going to help get it over the line, particularly if you're in a state where your representative might not be supportive. It might not seem like much, but most representatives actually get very few calls from their constituents, so even a few can be enough to tip something from not on their radar to, oh, I best support this. And now for your final bit of homework. Craft an email to the editor of your local paper or your local news organisation of choice. CC in your favourite or maybe least favourite automaker. Let them know that you are supportive of these rules and bills and that you want to see smaller cars back on US roads. If you're really feeling it, you could also suggest that we should allow individual or small numbers of imports of cars that meet European safety standards, because until we get cars that actually meet these proposed new rules, importing a smaller, safer vehicle should not be prohibited. Because the US automotive industry has made its position clear. It likes selling cheap-to-build, dangerously big things at a massive markup. If we want to see smaller vehicles on which they'll actually make less profit, we're going to have to push them hard. We're going to have to fight. Make us think about it, as we say back in the old country. It's the only way.
Thanks for joining me today. And if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them below in our Discord chat room, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They are some of the more than 1,500 people who help fund this channel through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills paying our team, and making sure that we can be 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. There's a range of different tiers you can sign up for, from as little as $1 a month, or if you pay yearly, just under $11 a year. A huge welcome to our newest supporters: Bree Crockford, Cap, Christian Buell, Everything on a Bagel, Pitcher Ian, and Brett Chandler. To join the list and get your shout out, become a paid Patreon member for your week of fame. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have an old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at. Address is also down below. And if you're in need of some swag, you'll find our swag store in the down below too. We've got some great content coming up, so make sure you've subscribed on PeerTube or YouTube, and we'll see you soon. We make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If you want more, the mighty algorithm thinks you'll like this video, but we think this one is also well worth a look. See you soon, and as always, keep evolving!